John, welcome. How are you?
Doing great, Mike. Thanks for having me today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Welcome to the program. I've never interviewed you before, so I looked up some things about you. I see that you studied some kind of science at Harvard. What was the environmental science? Is that what you studied?
I did, yes.
Can you tell us something about the pandemic? Do you have any pandemic experience?
Well, Mike, my pandemic experience has to do with my wife, who's a physician. So she's been taking care of COVID-19 patients for the last 6 weeks or so. So she's actually still at the hospital today.
Has she been in intensive care?
She's been doing great. And I would say, Mike, that the advice that she's given me at the outset about just keeping our distance and washing our hands and wearing masks, all those basics, still hold true today, and I've been listening to her as I have my whole life.
Has she been working in intensive care like a lot of doctors?
So she works one level below where the ICU would be. So she's an internal medicine doctor here in Michigan. So basically the next level below where the ICU is.
All right. Everybody we've talked to the last couple of weeks, everyone we have on, different writers and different people about whatever sport they cover, all are telling us how they see it and what they see as their issues. So from a baseball standpoint, as everyone starts to inch back, what are you most concerned about from a baseball standpoint?
It's a great question, Mike, just because there are still a lot of issues outstanding. I think, as Joel Sherman has written about in the New York Post as well, the key thing is now getting the agreement on the healthcare dynamics and making sure that all the requisite municipalities and the states all sign off on the plan. I think that, to me, is navigating that dynamic of trying to have all 30 teams playing potentially across the country. Who knows about Canada and with Toronto, if that's able to happen, certainly some obstacles there. But I just think, Mike, it's the differences between the states and making sure that all the playing is compliant with the local rules wherever the games are being played. I think financially, Mike, I'm very confident that a deal will happen by June 1.
The idea of what would shut the game, the logically tough one is, for all these sports, what will shut the game down again? What will it take? Is it 5 players? Is it more than one team? I mean, all the commissioners have said the same thing. One player can't shut the sport down. We all know that. But what can shut the sport down? I think, and I don't know if they'll even put that in writing, what will shut the sport down. But that, to me, is the main question. What would it take for them to say, we can't do this?
You're right, Mike, that probably we're not going to have a very firm rule as to what that is. I think what the commissioners across the board would say, and I think it's the correct way to look at it, is you have to consider the context in the city and the state in which the team and the player happen to be at that particular moment. We certainly can be hopeful that maybe the summer will bring some level of relief. We don't know that yet. But it does seem to me that it's not necessarily how many players on your team are infected, but maybe what the rate of transmission is broadly in that particular municipality and the state at the time, nationally. So I think it really depends. If there's an outbreak in a city and then you have an outbreak on your team, that's different than 2 or 3 players getting it in a circumstance where the overall rate of transmission, broadly speaking, is quite low.
You know, talking with Jon Morosi, MLB Network, does a lot of different things for them. John, baseball is going to try it a little differently. Now, they're coming back to start their season, basketball and hockey trying to finish theirs. So it's a little different setting. But the thing about baseball, which is going to be tricky, is you're going to deal with all the different cities, and they all have a different set of problems. Like, look at our problems in New York. Look at Michigan, and what no state has had more trouble and more problems than Michigan has had, as an example. So the climate is different in every one of these cities. That makes that very tricky for baseball.
It does, Mike. And I think the other part that's unique, as you point out, is that we're just trying to start a season in baseball, and it's not necessarily an unlimited amount of runway that we have to finish the season, which I think is why, after different ideas have been broached over the last couple of months, it does seem that 82-game season is the magic number, because I really believe that it's logical and sensible to not push things too far into the fall, because we know a lot of experts have said we could be due for a second spike in cases at that time. So I think you're right. It's the number of moving parts, the travel as well. I think that a really key part of the agreement, or at least the proposal, is keeping the travel in those thirds of the country, if you will, those different channels, west, central, east. I think that having as many traveling situations that don't involve long cross-country flights, that certainly works to baseball's advantage.
And you guys, whether it's MLB, the MLB Network, NFL Network, you guys have a different relationship with the sports. What do you see? Maybe you've been told already from your guys' standpoint. What do you see your role being? What do you see the media's role being? And how are they going to be treated? Do you know yet, or you don't know yet?
We don't know yet, Mike. And I think that for all of us, first and foremost, I think we're all citizens first and family members first. I know that's how I think of myself right now. It's how I've always tried to think about myself in that respect. But being married to a physician has really, I think, driven that point home for me right now about how I can best contribute, broadly speaking. But I think that for us, it's about telling the stories that are going to connect the American people to our sports. And I watched over the weekend. I thought my colleagues at Fox, and I still work at Fox Sports, the NASCAR production was great. I loved the post-race interview that was done with respectful distance. The Southern reporter, Regan Smith, was a number of feet away, and then there was a boom mic that held the stick microphone to get the sound from the driver. I think that, to me, it was very inventive. The race callers were back at the studio in Charlotte, and it looked brilliant at the end. Certainly, you're missing the fans in the arena, in the stadium, but in general, it's about having that celebration of watching the sport again, and it's our job, Mike, I believe, to tell the stories as completely and empathetically and thoroughly as we can, no matter if we're at home or at the venue itself.
Have you ever been a team play-by-play guy?
I have not. No, I've been a sideline reporter, so that's been my function for the large part in my TV career, and also in the studio analyst at times as well. But I think it's going to be a very unique thing to call if the play-by-play and the analyst are calling off tube, as they call it.
I think they're going to probably have to. I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a very unique arrangement, but that's where maybe the sideline reporter in some respects, Mike, becomes more important than ever, because then they're the eyes and ears of the broadcast. They're on the ground. We have to all wait and see, but I think we all have to be ready for anything. Right now.
I would think they would at least have a room where they would bring maybe the managers and one player from each team each night, and you'd have a couple of maybe pool reporters or a couple of people there who get to ask a couple of questions. Maybe that's what I haven't seen any plan for the media, and most of the broadcasters I've asked, none of them seem to know yet what their role is. So, I would think something like that's feasible anyway.
Right, or we may see some post-game press conferences done over Zoom or different technologies that we've all been getting used to using. It really is uncharted territory, Mike, and I think it's just all up to us. And when we think about what we're doing here, I think it's connecting the people that love these sports. We all want routine, and I do think, Mike, baseball has a very special role to play because it's the one sport you play every day.
No, listen. Not only that, it has a special relationship with our culture. There's no whether you still think baseball is the most important sport, which we know it's not anymore, or the one that does the best in the ratings. Doesn't matter. Baseball has a special role because of its daily schedule, but also because of how it's viewed. It is different, and I think it has a different responsibility. I really think it does. That's why I think it's important that the owners and the players see that and don't turn this into an ugly fight, which you don't seem to think that will happen.
I don't, because I think that both sides realize how important it is to play. And also that, to your point, Mike, that if baseball comes back this year, and I believe it will, that the economics and the money to be made is in the future. If you do it right now, if you're really careful with health and you're careful and thoughtful when it comes to the economics of things, fans are going to remember. American sports fans are very smart. They pay attention, and they're going to remember in 2025 who did it right in 2020. And I really think that the money to be made economically, that's for the future. But now it's that cultural connection that we all need right now. And I think if baseball does it right, it's going to really be remembered well in this country for many, many years to come.
Do you think there's teams that are in worse shape than others? Is there a team that stands out to you that you think is going to have more problems than other teams are going to have?
I don't think so, because I really believe that the revenue structure for a lot of teams, certainly the scale is different on the large revenue teams versus the smaller mid-market. But I think that the structure of the teams is quite similar in terms of how they get their local revenues and the national revenues as well. So I think it's going to be a fair start to begin the year. The one thing that's going to be unique, Mike, is how ready is the pitching? And that, I think, is going to really, I think, play into the hands and the advantage of the teams that have very strong, deep pitching staffs that are adaptable, that have a really good 30-man roster, more so than a 26-man roster.
What is a legitimate season for you? What has to happen for it to be a legitimate season?
I think 82 games is a fine number, Mike. I really do. I think that is probably around that magic number where you feel like it's enough. You've played within your division. You've played the corresponding teams in the opposite league within that same divisional structure. So I think that to me is very fair. And then the expanded playoffs, which that to me is really the unique part of all this. That the expanded playoffs were something that baseball was thinking about even before COVID-19, and now it becomes that much more of a reality to add another layer of excitement and intrigue to the playoffs, which I think is going to be great for the game in years to come, too.
We're talking with Jon Morosi, who's MLB Network. They're talking about 50 players. We know there's going to be a heavy load of pitchers carried. What do you think the nightly roster is going to be?
Great question, Mike. I think around 30 players, somewhere in that range. Maybe they would have it down to 26 just for the continuity of gameplay. But I really believe that when you don't know just how much the pitchers have been able to throw, because your point earlier on in the conversation, the number of different ordinances and state laws right now and regulations, you can't expect everyone to show up on June 10th or June 15th in game shape, ready to go, because they've all had to deal with different circumstances in terms of what they can actually do with their workouts. So I think as a result of that, Mike, for player safety purposes, I think a 30-player active roster to begin the year makes a lot of sense. Maybe you can reduce it as time goes on, but I really think having the additional health allocations there, knowing that there certainly is still a risk that a player could get ill during the course of the season, I think having the extra players right there with the team makes a lot of sense.
And what do you think teams do with their hotshot player who they wanted to put in the minor leagues for a couple of months? Forget the idea of his future in free agency. Forget about what they're trying to do in service time. Put that aside. Put about not having that guy not play this year because he doesn't have anywhere to play. Do you escalate that guy into a major league role when you didn't want to this year?
It's a really good point. I think that, Mike, if you've got a AA player or a AAA player who's a major prospect who is ready, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to be with the club, especially because the logistics now of calling up someone else from the minor leagues, how long it might take to get that player to the big leagues. Also, remember this, Mike, this is a sprint now. We always talk about baseball as being a marathon. This is a sprint season, and there are going to be 7 potential playoff berths in each league. The competition for them is going to be fierce, and you might see a team that didn't expect to be that great this year.
I think you will.
All of a sudden calls up the best guys and goes for it.
I have. I've had a couple of people mention teams. I've had people mention the White Sox. I've had people mention Arizona, the Texas Rangers. Yep. So I definitely think there will be a couple of teams that get off really fast and then can probably hang on for dear life. I think that probably will happen. I definitely, and I can tell you, it's not a bad thing. If you have one of those teams that isn't the most gifted, if you can get them honed and get them sharp and get them out of the gate fast, you can pick up maybe 5 or 10 games on the field over the first 25 games or so.
Exactly right, Mike. It's going to be a season truly unlike any that you and I have ever seen in our lives. And I think that among all the anxious things that we all have about just day-to-day life, the exhilaration of a sprint baseball season has a chance to be really special for, I think, everybody in the country.
I didn't think I'd ever see the World Series canceled. I don't know if you were working then. I was. We were doing Mike and the Mad Dog in those days. And we saw it canceled, and I never thought they'd cancel the World Series, and they did. And it was the bleakest time we ever worked in the years the Dog and I worked together. That was the only low point in terms of fan interest or anything else, was that time when they canceled the World Series. It really turned the public off to sports in a big way. I don't think it would be treated the same way if they didn't play this year because it's not their fault, but you can tell it's something none of these sports want to fool around with.
You're right, and I think that for baseball to be able to have a World Series, it's that celebration. It's a sense of closing out the year the right way. And I really think, Mike, that's why Baseball is not trying to schedule 120 games or 100 games. They're choosing a manageable number. 82 is manageable because the worst case would be to play the regular season and have to cancel the playoffs because of a second spike because we were trying to get it all the way into November. If you play the playoffs roughly on schedule in October, I think you've got a better chance for that postseason to be played, especially if you have to go to one site, because when you think about it, Mike, logistically, if you're playing your games at a neutral site, if you have to do that during the playoffs, it's much easier to find one site that is safe to play where the transmission rate is low than 8.
Has there been anything discussed yet that MLB Network will do differently this year?
I don't know, Mike. That's a great question. I think we're all waiting on just the direction, first and foremost, to have the season be played, and I think we'll make the programming decisions, or my bosses will, from there. And then I will take whatever directions are given and do our best with it. But I think that the last couple months have been good preparation of just kind of preparing ourselves mentally to be as flexible as possible. And then when the word go is given, I'll be happy to do my part.
Thanks very much for coming on. Appreciate it. Good luck.
Mike, my pleasure. Have a great weekend. Thanks so much.
Jon Morosi, MLB Network.